An innocent black woman is attacked by a violent prison gang, just days after arriving behind bars. They think she's weak, broken, and easy to silence. But what they don't know is that she's the most ruthless fighter the system has ever locked away. With scars no one sees and a past she's tried to bury, her silence isn't fear. It's a warning. And when she finally strikes back, she doesn't just fight to survive. She fights to change everything. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The late afternoon sun beat down on Atlanta's streets, turning the asphalt into a shimmering mirage. Maya Thompson's old Honda Civic hummed along, its air conditioning working overtime against the July heat. In the passenger seat, her 10-year-old brother Jamal bobbed his head to the music flowing through the car speakers, his basketball tucked safely between his feet. "How'd you even find this song?" Maya asked, glancing at her brother with a smile. The rhythm of an old-school hip-hop track filled the car, bringing back memories from her own childhood. Jamal's face lit up with pride. "I went through some of Mom's old CDs in the basement, made a whole playlist of stuff I thought you'd like." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the track list with enthusiasm. "There's like 30 more songs on here." Maya felt a familiar warmth in her chest. Ever since their mother passed 3 years ago, Jamal had found little ways to keep her memory alive. "Mom would have loved seeing you play today," she said softly. "That three-pointer you made? Pure magic." "You think?" Jamal's eyes sparkled. "Coach says if I keep practicing, I might make starter next season." "I know you will." Maya reached over to ruffle his hair, earning a playful groan from her brother. The familiar streets of their neighborhood came into view, lined with modest houses and old oak trees that provided patches of shade. Pulling up to their small brick home, Maya put the car in park. "Okay, little man. Homework first, then video games. I'll be back in about an hour with groceries." "Can we have spaghetti tonight?" Jamal asked, gathering his basketball and backpack. "Already planned on it?" Maya watched as he bounded up the front steps, using his key to let himself in. She waited until she saw him wave from the living room window before pulling away from the curb. The grocery store was only 15 minutes away, and Maya mentally ran through her shopping list. The playlist Jamal made continued to play, bringing a smile to her face with each familiar song. She was so lost in the music that she almost missed the flash of blue lights in her rearview mirror. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the officer stepping out of the patrol car. Kyle Mercer's tall frame unfolded from the driver's seat, his hand resting casually on his belt as he approached her window. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. "License and registration," Kyle demanded, his tone sharp and professional, nothing like the voice he'd used when they dated 2 years ago. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but Maya could feel the cold intensity of his stare. "What's this about?" Maya asked, keeping her voice steady as she handed over her documents. "Your right taillight's out." Kyle's lips curved into what might have looked like a smile to anyone else, but Maya knew better. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "My taillight's fine. I checked all my lights yesterday." Maya's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Kyle's face hardened. "Step out of the vehicle, now." As Maya opened her door, another patrol car pulled up. 2 more officers emerged, their hands already on their weapons. The situation was escalating faster than she could process. "I'm going to need to search your vehicle," Kyle announced, his voice carrying for the benefit of his backup. "No," Maya said firmly. "I don't consent to a search." Kyle's smile turned predatory. "I'm afraid we have probable cause." He nodded to the other officers, who moved toward her car without hesitation. Maya stood helplessly as they tore through her vehicle. She watched as they checked under seats, in the glove compartment, and finally popped the trunk. Her stomach dropped when one of the officers called out, "Look what we have here." The officer emerged from the trunk holding a brick-shaped package wrapped in brown tape. Maya's blood ran cold as he pulled out 3 more identical packages. "That's not mine," Maya said, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "You know that's not mine." Kyle grabbed her arm, spinning her around to face the car. The metal hood was hot against her chest as he roughly handcuffed her. His breath was hot against her ear as he leaned in close. "Should have kept your mouth shut." Maya's phone slipped from her pocket, clattering to the pavement. The screen cracked on impact, Jamal's playlist still showing on the display. She thought of her brother waiting at home, probably already starting his homework at the kitchen table, expecting her to return with groceries for their spaghetti dinner. The drive to the station was a blur of sirens and flashing lights. Maya sat in the back of Kyle's patrol car, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The partition between the front and back seats reflected her own pale face back at her, and behind that, she could see Kyle's satisfied smirk in the rearview mirror. The handcuffs bit into her wrists as the car hit a pothole, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the terror growing in her chest. She thought of Jamal again, alone at home, waiting. Her brother needed her. She was all he had left. The police cruiser turned a corner and the station came into view. Maya's breath caught in her throat as the reality of her situation crashed over her. She knew what Kyle had done, knew this was revenge for her threatening to report his misconduct, but that knowledge wouldn't help her now. Not with 4 bricks of cocaine that would make any defense lawyer's job impossible. The car rolled to a stop in front of the station, and Maya closed her eyes, trying to steady her racing heart. The sound of sirens continued to wail in the distance, a mocking reminder of how quickly life could spiral out of control. The fluorescent lights in the county jail holding cell buzzed incessantly, a sound that had become both maddening and familiar to Maya over the past few weeks. She sat on the thin mattress, her back against the cold concrete wall, trying to remember the sound of Jamal's laughter instead of that endless drone. Her fingers traced the worn edge of his last letter, delivered 3 days ago, the paper soft from countless readings. "I miss you so much," he had written in his careful schoolboy hand. "Aunt Louise makes good food, but not as good as your spaghetti." The cell door clanked open, startling Maya from her thoughts. A guard stood in the doorway, her expression bored. "Thompson, your lawyer's here." Maya followed the guard down the corridor, her orange jumpsuit feeling particularly heavy today. The meeting room was small and sterile, with a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 plastic chairs. Her court-appointed attorney, Mr. Davidson, sat hunched over a stack of papers, his tie loose and his shirt wrinkled. "Ms. Thompson," he said without looking up, shuffling through the documents. "We've got about 10 minutes before your arraignment." He finally raised his eyes to meet hers, and Maya could see the dark circles under them, the slight tremor in his hands that spoke of too much coffee and too little sleep. "Have you looked at the dashcam footage?" Maya asked, leaning forward. "It'll show that Officer Mercer—" "There was a technical malfunction with the camera that day." Davidson cut her off, his voice flat. "Look, Miss Thompson, I've got to be straight with you. The prosecution has a strong case. 4 bricks of cocaine, a veteran officer's testimony, 2 corroborating witnesses." He paused, running a hand through his thinning hair. "They're offering 15 years with possibility of parole after 8 if you plead guilty." Maya's stomach lurched. 8 years? My brother's only 10. I can't. "Without a plea, you're looking at 25 to life." Davidson checked his watch. "The DA's not playing around. You've got priors from your teenage years and—" "Those were sealed juvenile records." Maya's voice echoed off the concrete walls. Davidson shrugged. "They found a way around that. Listen, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but I'm representing 4 other cases today. I'm trying to help you make the best of a bad situation." Before Maya could respond, the guard appeared at the door. "Time?" The courtroom felt cavernous, its high ceilings and wooden panels designed to make everyone below feel small. Maya sat beside Davidson at the defense table, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. The gallery behind her was sparsely filled, a few lawyers waiting for their cases, some reporters, and uniformed officers who had come to support their colleague. Kyle Mercer sat in the front row, his uniform pressed and gleaming, the picture of law enforcement integrity. When he took the stand, his voice carried clearly through the courtroom. "I observed Ms. Thompson's vehicle driving erratically," he testified, his face a mask of professional concern. "When I approached the vehicle, she appeared nervous, agitated. After she gave consent for the search—" "Objection," Maya whispered urgently to Davidson. "He's lying. I never—" Davidson barely glanced at her, continuing to scribble notes on his legal pad. "The cocaine was clearly visible in the trunk," Kyle continued. "Based on my experience, this amount of narcotics indicates intent to distribute." Maya watched in growing horror as her attorney's cross-examination consisted of 3 basic questions, none of which addressed the contradictions in Kyle's testimony. When Davidson sat down, Maya stood up. "Your Honor, please, Ms. Thompson." The judge's voice cracked like a whip. "You will remain seated and silent, or you will be removed from this courtroom. Your attorney speaks for you here." Maya sank back into her chair, her chest tight with panic. She watched as the prosecutor presented the evidence. Photographs of the cocaine, testimony from the backup officers, a printout of her juvenile record that somehow wasn't as sealed as it should have been. When it came time for the bail hearing portion, the prosecutor stood again. "Your Honor, given the severity of the charges and the amount of narcotics involved, the state requests that bail be denied. Ms. Thompson poses a significant flight risk." "Your Honor," Davidson said, standing slowly, "my client has strong community ties. Her younger brother is currently in the custody of a relative," the prosecutor interrupted. "And Ms. Thompson's history of violence, as evidenced by her juvenile record, makes her a danger to the community." The judge peered down at Maya over his reading glasses. "Bail is denied. The defendant will be remanded to Coldstone Penitentiary pending trial." His gavel fell with a sharp crack that seemed to echo in Maya's bones. 2 guards approached to escort her out. As they led her toward the side door, Maya turned her head and met Kyle's eyes. He sat in his chair, relaxed and confident, the slight upturn of his lips visible only to her. In that small smile she saw everything. His satisfaction at her downfall, his pleasure in wielding the system against her, his certainty that he had won. The guard's hands tightened on her arms as they guided her through the door. The last thing she saw was Kyle's smirk, and then the heavy door swung shut behind her with a final, devastating thud. In the holding area, Maya stood still as they processed her for transfer, her mind racing but her body numb. She had seen enough in her life to recognize when someone had been buried by the system. Now she was being buried too, and the worst part was knowing that somewhere across town, Jamal was probably sitting in Aunt Louise's kitchen, doing his homework, still believing that justice would prevail, that his sister would come home. The transfer papers were signed and a different set of guards stepped forward to take custody of her. As they secured her handcuffs for transport, Maya felt the weight of every bad decision, every wrong turn that had led her here. Not her own decisions, but Kyle's, the system's, the world's. The guard gave her a small push forward, and she began the long walk toward the transport van that would take her to Coldstone Penitentiary. The prison transport bus rattled down the highway, its ancient suspension groaning with every bump and pothole. Maya sat near the middle, her wrists and ankles bound in cold steel, watching the Atlanta skyline disappear in the dirty window. The familiar city towers gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to endless stretches of farmland dotted with rustic barns and grazing cattle. The other prisoners had grown quiet after the first hour, the initial bravado and chatter fading into exhausted silence. Maya hadn't spoken a word since they'd loaded her onto the bus at dawn. Her mind felt wrapped in cotton, disconnected from the reality of what was happening. The events of the past month played through her thoughts like scenes from someone else's life. The traffic stop, Kyle's smirk, the judge's gavel coming down. Through the smudged window, Maya watched the landscape change. Confederate flags hung limply from front porches. Hand-painted signs advertised fresh produce and Jesus. Small towns appeared and vanished, their main streets empty except for a few pickup trucks parked outside dollar stores. The few people visible were all white, going about their daily routines, probably never thinking about the busload of prisoners passing through their town. The bus turned onto a narrower road, and Maya caught glimpses of Coldstone's towers through the trees, stark concrete against the blue Georgia sky. Her stomach clenched as the bus approached the first checkpoint. The guard driving the bus exchanged paperwork with the gate officer, and then they were moving again, rolling past layers of razor wire that gleamed in the afternoon sun. The intake process began the moment they stepped off the bus. Guards barked orders, herding the new arrivals through a series of heavy steel doors. The air inside was cold and smelled of industrial cleaner. Maya followed the line of women into a large room where they were ordered to strip. "Everything off," a guard announced, snapping on latex gloves. "Put your clothes in the bin. Nothing goes to waste." Maya removed her clothing mechanically, folding each item with precise movements. The concrete floor was ice against her bare feet. She kept her eyes forward as the guards conducted their searches, their touch impersonal and rough. One guard made a comment about a tattoo on another inmate's back, and the others laughed. The showers came next. 3 minutes of lukewarm water that smelled like chemicals. Maya scrubbed quickly with the harsh soap they'd been given, trying not to think about the dozens of others who'd used it before her. Water dripped from her hair as she dried off with a thin towel and put on the orange uniform they'd issued her. In the medical screening room, a tired-looking nurse recorded Maya's vital signs and asked routine questions about her health history. The woman's eyes lingered on the old scars across Maya's knuckles, the slightly crooked set of her nose that hadn't healed quite right after being broken. "Previous injuries?" the nurse asked, pen hovering over the form. "Sports," Maya answered flatly. The nurse's expression showed she didn't believe it, but she just nodded and made some notes. She pressed her fingers against Maya's ribs, finding the spots where bones had cracked and mended years ago. More notes on the form. No questions asked. "Block D," the nurse said finally, stamping the paperwork. "Women's High Security Unit." A guard appeared to escort Maya through more corridors, past more security checkpoints. The sounds changed as they entered the cell block, voices echoing off concrete, metal doors clanging, the squeak of shoes on institutional floors. Other inmates pressed against the bars of their cells to watch her pass. Some called out comments or whistled. Others just stared with flat, evaluating eyes. "Fresh meat," someone said, and others laughed. Maya kept her face neutral, her stride steady. She'd learned long ago not to show fear, not to react to provocations. But she counted the turns they made, noted which corridors had cameras and which didn't, mapped the layout in her mind. Old habits died hard. They stopped at cell 2187. The guard rapped his baton against the bars. "Shauna, got you a new roommate?" A woman looked up from the bottom bunk, tall, muscular, with multiple teardrop tattoos under her left eye. She took in Maya's appearance with a scowl as the guard opened the cell door. "In you go," the guard said to Maya. "Get comfortable, you'll be here a while." The cell door slammed shut with a metallic clang that seemed to echo through Maya's bones. The space was tiny. 2 bunks bolted to the wall, a steel toilet, a small sink with a cloudy mirror above it. The concrete walls were etched with years of graffiti and tally marks. Shauna stood up, using her height to loom over Maya. "Let's get something straight right now. Top bunk's mine. Toilet's mine when I want it. You got something to say about that?" Maya met her gaze steadily. "No." "Good." Shauna moved closer, her breath hot on Maya's face. "And if you snore, we're gonna have problems. Don't try to get cute with me either. I've been here 8 years, and I've gone through 4 cellmates. None of them lasted long." Maya didn't respond, just held Shauna's stare until the other woman stepped back with a grunt of satisfaction. Shauna climbed onto the top bunk, making the whole frame creak. Night fell slowly in the cell block, marked by the dimming of lights and the changing of guards. Maya lay on the thin mattress of the bottom bunk, hands folded across her stomach, eyes fixed on the metal springs above her. Somewhere down the corridor, a woman was screaming, the same raw, angry sound she'd been making for hours. Metal doors slammed in distant parts of the prison. Keys jingled as guards made their rounds. Shauna's breathing had grown heavy and regular, punctuated by occasional snores, ironic, given her earlier warning. Maya remained awake, her body tense despite her exhaustion. The mattress crackled with every slight movement, stuffed with what felt like shredded plastic rather than cotton. The blanket was thin and scratchy against her skin. Another scream echoed through the block, closer this time, followed by the sound of running feet and guards shouting. Maya listened to the chaos without moving, without changing her steady breathing. She thought of Jamal in his bed across town, of the glow-in-the-dark stars they'd stuck to his ceiling together. She wondered if he was sleeping, if he was safe, if Aunt Louise was taking good care of him. The screaming eventually stopped, The running feet retreated. Somewhere, a heavy door slammed shut with finality, the sound reverberating through the walls of Coldstone Penitentiary. Maya continued to stare at the bunk above her, counting her breaths, waiting for a dawn that seemed very far away. Maya woke before dawn, her body still operating on street time. The cell was dark except for the dim security lights that never went out. She lay still, listening to Shauna's heavy breathing above her, waiting for the morning count. At 6 a.m. sharp, guards moved down the tier, banging batons against bars. "Count time! On your feet!" Maya stood at attention beside her bunk as two officers passed, marking numbers on their clipboards without making eye contact. The mess hall opened at 6:30. Maya joined the shuffle of orange uniforms moving through the corridors, keeping her eyes down, her shoulders relaxed but ready. The line moved slowly through the serving area. She could feel the tension in the air. Too many bodies pressed too close together, the smell of institutional food and unwashed clothes, the constant murmur of conversations she couldn't quite hear. When she reached the serving counter, she held out her tray without looking up. The inmate server, a heavy-set woman with teardrop tattoos, slopped food onto her tray with deliberate carelessness. Maya moved down the line mechanically until she reached the end, where a thin woman with track marks on her arms served the mashed potatoes. The woman's eyes flicked to someone behind Maya, and a slight smirk crossed her face as she spooned the potatoes onto the tray. Maya caught the sharp chemical smell rising from them, cleaning solution, probably from the mop bucket. She set the tray down at an empty table without touching the food. The yard was a concrete rectangle surrounded by high walls topped with razor wire. Maya found a spot against the fence where she could see most of the yard while keeping her back protected. Women clustered in small groups, some power walking the perimeter for exercise, others playing cards or braiding each other's hair. The argument started near the basketball court. Two women, one tall and muscular, the other small but wiry, squared off over what looked like a pack of cigarettes. Maya watched their body language, the way they postured, the subtle shifts of weight that telegraphed their intentions. The first punch came from the smaller woman, a quick jab that caught the tall one in the mouth. Blood sprayed as the tall woman's head snapped back. She recovered fast, charging forward with a roar. They went down in a tangle of limbs rolling on the concrete. Other inmates gathered to watch, forming a loose circle and calling encouragement. Guards took their time responding. By the time they broke it up, both women were bloody and the cigarettes had disappeared into the crowd. From her spot against the fence, Maya noticed an older black woman watching her from a bench. The woman had one eye clouded with cataracts, but her good eye was sharp and alert. She sat with the easy confidence of someone who knew their place in the hierarchy. Maya encountered her again in the laundry room that afternoon. She was sorting sheets when the one-eyed woman appeared beside her. "What were you, Golden Gloves?" the woman asked, her voice rough but not unfriendly. Maya continued folding, her movements precise and economical. She didn't respond. The woman chuckled, a low, knowing sound. "You're one of the ghosts, aren't you? I can tell. Way you move, way you watch everything. Name's June Harris. Most folks call me Auntie." Maya glanced at her briefly, then returned to her work. June didn't seem offended by the silence. "Listen up, Ghost," June said, her voice dropping lower. "You want to survive in here, you keep your head down. Stay invisible." She nodded toward a table across the room where a group of white women worked, their arms covered in elaborate tattoos. "You don't want attention, not from them." The women June indicated moved with the easy arrogance of predators on their home turf. Maya recognized the tattoos, Celtic crosses, Norse symbols, numbers that meant something to those who knew how to read them. The Bone Crew, according to the whispers she'd heard. "They run things in here," June continued, sorting sheets with practiced efficiency. "Guards look the other way most times. They got people on the outside, too. Best to stay clear." Maya absorbed the information without visible reaction, but her mind was already cataloging details. Which guards seemed to favor the Bone Crew, which inmates gave them extra space, who carried messages for them. She felt the attention before she saw it. Looking up from her folding, she met the eyes of one of the Bone Crew women, a stocky blonde with a spider web tattooed on her neck. The woman smirked, nudging her companion, who began tapping a metal spoon against the folding table in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Maya held their gaze, her expression neutral but her eyes hard and unblinking. The message was clear on both sides, a challenge issued and accepted. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the mess hall as Maya sat alone at her usual table, mechanically spooning bland oatmeal into her mouth. The morning crowd shuffled through their routines, getting coffee, trading items under tables, complaining about the food. But something was different today. The air felt charged, like before a thunderstorm. The Bone Crew's table was louder than usual. Their raucous laughter cut through the general din, drawing glances from other inmates who quickly looked away. Maya kept her eyes on her tray, but her peripheral vision caught their pointing fingers and meaningful looks in her direction. "Hey baby, you gonna eat all that by yourself?" one of them called out, triggering another round of theatrical laughter. Maya continued eating, each movement deliberate and unhurried. She'd learned long ago that reaction was what they wanted, any sign that their words had found purchase. She gave them nothing. Across the room, June sat with her usual breakfast crew, but her attention was fixed on the growing tension. Her good eye narrowed as she watched the Bone Crew's performance, her weathered hands gripping her coffee cup a little too tight. The morning dragged on until Maya's work assignment came up, laundry duty again. The laundry room was tucked away in the basement level, a maze of industrial washers and dryers that filled the space with constant noise and suffocating heat. Steam rose from the machines, making the air thick and hard to breathe. Maya was loading sheets into a cart when she sensed the shift in the room's energy. The regular workers had disappeared. The door clicked shut. She turned slowly to find 3 members of the Bone Crew positioned strategically around her. Roxy, their leader, stood directly in front of her. She was tall and muscular with a shaved head and a spiderweb tattoo crawling up her neck. Another woman, shorter, but just as solid, blocked the door. The third, thin and twitchy, circled to Maya's left, a pair of scissors palmed poorly behind her back. "You know what we do to new property that doesn't know its place?" Roxy asked, cracking her knuckles with deliberate menace. Her voice carried the rasp of too many cigarettes. Maya said nothing, but her body shifted subtly, weight centered, hands loose at her sides. She'd been in enough fights to recognize the moment just before violence erupted. The air seemed to crystallize around them. They moved at once, coordinated through practice. Roxy lunged forward, reaching for Maya's throat. The woman with scissors darted in from the left. The third blocked any escape route. Maya's response was immediate and precise. As Roxy's hand came toward her, she stepped in instead of back, catching the woman's wrist and twisting it into a joint lock. The momentum carried them forward, and Maya used it, driving Roxy's arm up between her shoulder blades until something cracked. The scissors came slashing toward her ribs. Maya released Roxy, who crumpled with a howl and spun away from the blade. Her hip hit a folding table and she grabbed it instinctively. In one fluid motion, she swung the table like a lever, catching the second attacker in the chest and slamming her backward into a dryer. The woman's head cracked against the metal with a hollow sound, and she slumped to the floor. The third woman, the one who'd been blocking the door, hesitated for just a moment. That was all Maya needed. She closed the distance in 2 steps, ducking under a wild punch and sweeping the woman's legs. As they went down, Maya locked her arm around the woman's throat in a precise hold. The woman thrashed, trying to break free, but Maya's grip was positioned perfectly. Within seconds, the struggling stopped as unconsciousness took hold. Maya released the hold and rose smoothly to her feet. The whole encounter had lasted less than 30 seconds. Roxy was curled around her broken wrist, whimpering. The second woman hadn't moved from where she'd hit the dryer. The third lay unconscious but breathing steadily. She heard the pounding of boots in the corridor, guards finally responding to the commotion. Maya stepped back from the bodies and raised her hands, her breathing controlled and even. She'd been careful. No blood, no permanent damage, nothing that couldn't be explained as self-defense. Not that it would matter. The door burst open and 4 guards rushed in, taking in the scene with wide eyes, 3 white inmates down, and Maya standing calmly in the middle of it all. Their shock quickly turned to fury. "On the ground!" "Now," one shouted, already reaching for his baton. Maya dropped to her knees, keeping her hands visible. They grabbed her roughly, wrenching her arms behind her back. The cuffs went on too tight, biting into her wrists. As they dragged her toward the door, she caught a glimpse of June in the hallway, watching with a mixture of admiration and concern. The older woman shook her head slowly. "That girl just painted a target on her back," June whispered to herself as Maya disappeared around the corner. The guards shoved Maya into the cramped solitary cell with enough force to make her stumble. She caught herself before hitting the concrete wall, turning just in time to see the heavy metal door slam shut with a resonating clang. The sound echoed through the tiny space, leaving behind a silence broken only by the persistent hum of fluorescent lights overhead. 6 by 8 feet, no windows, just gray walls, a metal toilet, and a thin mattress on a concrete slab. The fluorescent light buzzed incessantly, casting harsh shadows that made the cell feel even smaller. Maya stood perfectly still, taking in her new reality with careful, measured breaths. A small vent near the ceiling pushed stale air into the cell. Below it, a pipe leaked steadily. Drip, drip, drip. The water hitting the floor in a rhythm that would become both maddening and grounding in the days to come. Time became abstract almost immediately. Meals slid under the door at irregular intervals, always cold, always less than what general population received. Sometimes it was barely edible. Dried-out bologna sandwiches, watery oatmeal, vegetables well past their prime. Maya ate mechanically, knowing her body needed the sustenance, no matter how unpalatable. She established a routine on what she thought was the second day: push-ups until her arms shook, squats until her legs burned, shadowboxing in the limited space, her movements precise and controlled despite the constraints. The exercise helped keep the walls from closing in, kept her mind from spiraling into the abyss of isolation. Between sets, she sat cross-legged on the thin mattress, back straight, eyes closed. Her breathing settled into a steady rhythm, in through the nose, out through the mouth. She'd learned meditation years ago, but never had it been more crucial than now. The silence became her teacher, her discipline, her anchor. Drip, drip, drip. She counted the seconds between each drop of water, using it to mark time's passage. 60 drops, 1 minute. 3,600 drops, 1 hour. The mathematics of isolation. In the endless quiet, memories surfaced like bubbles in still water. She was 17 again, standing in a dimly lit warehouse converted into an underground fight club. The smell of sweat and blood hung thick in the air. Her opponent, a woman twice her size, circled her with predatory confidence. Maya remembered the fear, the adrenaline, the moment she realized she could either break or become unbreakable. She chose the latter. Drip, drip, drip. Another memory. Kyle's hands on her shoulders, heavy and possessive. She'd tried to quit fighting, wanted to focus on her outreach work at the community center. "Baby, you're throwing away good money," he'd said, fingers digging into her skin. "Those street kids aren't worth your time." She'd shrugged him off that day, but his grip had only tightened in other ways. The fluorescent light flickered, bringing her back to the present. Maya rolled her shoulders, stretched her neck. The cell was cold, they always kept it cold, but she barely noticed anymore. Her body had adapted just as it had adapted to everything else life had thrown at her. More memories came, whether she wanted them or not. Marcus, a 14-year-old kid from the center, showing her his gang tattoo with pride. She'd shown him her fight scars in return, told him about choices and consequences. 2 months later, he'd turned in his colors and started attending GED classes. Small victories that meant everything. Drip, drip, drip. Days blurred together. Maya maintained her routine with military precision. Push-ups, meditation, shadowboxing, counting drops. She refused to let the isolation erode her discipline. The guards who brought her meals never spoke, but she could feel their eyes on her through the small window in the door, waiting for her to crack. She gave them nothing. On what she calculated was the 23rd day, the routine broke. The door opened during what should have been quiet hours. 2 guards entered, their faces hard masks of authority. "On your feet, inmate," one ordered. Maya rose slowly, deliberately. They cuffed her hands behind her back and led her through a maze of corridors. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter out here, almost painful after so long in the dim cell. Her legs felt strange walking such a distance, but she kept her pace steady, her face neutral. They brought her to a small room, an office, but one clearly designed for intimidation. No windows here either, just more gray walls and harsh lighting. A metal table bolted to the floor dominated the space, with 2 chairs on opposite sides. In one chair sat Warden Thomas Mercer. Maya recognized him immediately. She'd seen that same smug expression on his nephew's face. The family resemblance was striking. The same cold eyes, the same air of entitled authority. He wore a crisp uniform with polished brass buttons, his gray hair perfectly trimmed. The guards pushed Maya into the empty chair. She sat without resistance, her cuffed hands resting in her lap. The metal was cold against her wrists. "Miss Thompson," Warden Mercer said, drawing out each syllable like he was savoring expensive wine. "I hope you've found your accommodations enlightening." Maya met his gaze steadily but remained silent. "3 inmates in the infirmary," he continued, opening a file on the table. "One with a broken wrist, another with a concussion. That's a serious offense. Very serious." He looked up from the papers, studying her face. "You want another 20 years added? Because that's what you're headed toward." The threat hung in the air between them. Maya could feel the weight of it, the years stretching out like a dark road. But she'd survived 17 days in a cage at 17. She'd survived Kyle's manipulation and betrayal. She'd survived 23 days in the hole. Her voice when she spoke was clear and unwavering despite weeks of disuse. "Try me." Maya's return to Block D felt surreal after 23 days in solitary. The familiar sounds of prison life, metal doors, distant conversations, shuffling feet, seemed amplified. Her old cell looked different now. Shauna's possessions were gone, leaving one side eerily empty. The guards had transferred her aggressive former cellmate during Maya's time in the hole, leaving her with a rare privilege in prison: solitude. She stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the change. The cell still smelled of industrial cleaner and old concrete, but something was different. A neatly folded blanket sat on her bunk, thick gray wool, far better than the thin standard-issue ones. Beside it lay 2 pieces of plain white bread, wrapped carefully in a paper napkin. "Don't thank me," June's gravelly voice came from behind her. The older woman stood in the doorway, her one good eye fixed on Maya with an intensity that seemed to see right through her. "You've just been drafted." Maya turned, studying June more carefully now. The woman's gray-streaked hair was pulled back in neat cornrows, her orange uniform pressed despite its age. She carried herself with quiet authority, different from the loud posturing of the Bone Crew. This was power earned through time and wisdom, not violence. "Come with me," June said, turning without waiting for a response. Maya followed her through the block, past cells where women paused their activities to watch them pass. Some nodded respectfully to June, others quickly looked away. They ended up in the laundry room, empty now, the machine silent. June checked the corners methodically, then pulled Maya behind a row of dryers. She pressed on what looked like a loose panel, revealing a small cavity in the wall. "Welcome to the real Coldstone," June said, reaching into the space. She pulled out a stack of worn notebooks, their covers disguised to look like religious texts. "Meet the daughters." Over the next hour, June introduced Maya to a world hidden within Coldstone's walls. The daughters were everywhere, in the kitchen, the infirmary, the chapel, the yard. Most were women of color, serving long sentences, their connections forged through shared suffering and survival. "We communicate through the laundry," June explained, showing Maya different fold patterns in sheets that carried coded messages. Kitchen staff mark messages in bread placement. Chapel books get passed with notes hidden in the bindings. Even the way we arrange our food trays can send signals. June introduced other members gradually. There was Rosa in the kitchen, serving 25 years for defending herself against an abusive husband. Sarah in the infirmary, who'd been sterilized without her knowledge during a routine procedure. Denise in maintenance, denied parole 6 times for infractions as minor as having an extra shirt in her cell. Each woman had a story, each story a thread in a larger tapestry of systemic abuse. They showed Maya their hidden archive, hundreds of pages documenting years of injustice. Guard rotations were mapped out in detail, including which ones traded favors for sexual abuse. Inmate deaths were recorded with real causes, not the sanitized versions in official reports. They had lists of staff members' real names, their connections outside the prison, their pressure points. "This is how we survive," June said, carefully returning the documents to their hiding place. "Knowledge is power in here. The guards think they run this place, but we see everything. We remember everything." Maya absorbed it all silently, her tactical mind already mapping the network's structure. It was impressive, invisible to those who weren't looking for it, resilient because it was built on necessity rather than greed or violence. "We need you to deliver something," June said, pulling out a small folded paper. "Kitchen staff needs to know which guard gave the Bone Crew access to restricted areas. We have suspicions, but we need confirmation. You're new enough that they won't expect you to be involved." Maya took the note, feeling its weight, not just the paper, but the trust it represented. She tucked it into her sleeve with practiced ease, but her eyes remained hard. "I'm not here for politics," she said flatly. "I'm here for revenge." June's laugh was short and bitter, her good eye glinting with understanding. "Same thing in here, baby girl. Same thing in here." Maya studied the older woman's face, seeing the years of fight beneath the careful calm. June had been revolutionary in the 80s, she remembered. She'd fought against the same system then that they were fighting now, just from a different angle. Around them, the laundry room's machines hummed back to life as other inmates began filtering in for the afternoon shift. June straightened up, resuming her usual stern expression. But before she turned to leave, she placed a weathered hand on Maya's shoulder. The gesture carried weight, not controlling like Kyle's grip had been, but steadying, supportive. It reminded Maya of her grandmother, who'd taught her that strength wasn't just in fighting back, but in choosing when and how to fight. Maya nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the trust being placed in her. She understood now that she wasn't just another inmate anymore. She was part of something larger, something that had been growing in Coldstone's shadows long before she arrived. The note felt warm against her skin as she watched June walk away, her steps measured and purposeful. Maya knew that her path to revenge had just become more complicated, and perhaps more meaningful, than she'd initially planned. The mail cart's squeaky wheels echoed through Block D as Officer Reynolds made his rounds. Maya sat on her bunk, not expecting anything. She hadn't received mail since her arrest. No one knew where to reach her except Jamal, and she'd told him not to write, afraid Kyle would intercept the letters. When Reynolds stopped at her cell, he barely looked at her as he slid a food tray through the slot. Maya noticed immediately something was off. Meal service wasn't for another 2 hours. Her heart quickened as she approached the tray carefully. Tucked under a folded napkin was a photograph. No envelope, no stamp. The image was grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a phone camera, but Maya would recognize that red backpack anywhere. Jamal walked down their old neighborhood street, head down, shoulders hunched against an invisible weight. He looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable than she remembered. Maya's hands trembled as she turned the photo over. One word was written in block letters: leverage. The food tray clattered to the floor. Maya barely noticed the sound as she stormed through the block, her feet carrying her straight to the laundry room where she knew June would be working. Several inmates stepped quickly out of her path, recognizing the dangerous energy radiating from her rigid posture. June stood by the industrial washers, sorting sheets with methodical precision. She looked up as Maya approached, reading the situation in an instant. "Show me," June said quietly, holding out her hand. Maya thrust the photo at her. June studied it for a long moment, her good eye narrowing as she took in the threat's implications. "How?" Maya's voice was raw. "How did they get this to me?" June glanced around before pulling Maya behind the rumbling dryers, their usual spot for private conversations. Bone Crew's got people on the outside, real people with badges and guns, not just thugs. "Kyle," Maya spat the name like poison. "That boy's got eyes everywhere," June confirmed, her voice heavy with understanding. "And he doesn't just want you locked up. He wants your soul, wants to break you piece by piece until there's nothing left. Maya's fist slammed against the concrete wall. She barely felt the pain. I need to know what's happening to my brother, please. The last word came out desperate, a plea she'd never allowed herself before. June pressed her lips together, considering. After a moment, she nodded. Come with me. They walked to the library, where a small woman with wire-rimmed glasses was restocking shelves. Marla, Maya remembered, one of the daughters June had introduced her to earlier that week. Show her, June commanded, handing Marla the photo. Marla adjusted her glasses, studying the image. I used to work as a court records clerk before. She gestured vaguely at their surroundings. Still got some contacts who owe me favors. Give me a few hours. Maya spent those hours pacing her cell, counting steps, fighting the urge to scream. Every scenario played through her mind. Jamal hurt, Jamal alone, Jamal scared. She'd practically raised him after their mother died. He was all she had left. When lights out came, Maya lay rigid on her bunk, staring into darkness. Footsteps approached, too light for a guard. Someone slipped something under her door. Maya. Marla's whisper was barely audible. Your brother. He's in custody. Armed robbery charge. The words hit Maya like physical blows. Jamal? Armed robbery? It was impossible. He was terrified of guns. Wouldn't even play with water pistols as a kid. Where? Maya pressed against the door, straining to hear. That's the worst part. Marla's voice cracked slightly. They're moving him here. To the juvenile wing. Maya stumbled back from the door, her legs giving out. She slid down the wall until she hit the floor. Coldstone had a notorious juvenile facility attached to the main prison. She'd seen the building when the bus first brought her in. The thought of Jamal in there, surrounded by the same corrupt system that had swallowed her, made her physically ill. She crawled back to her bunk, her mind racing. Kyle had orchestrated all of it, her arrest, the planted drugs, and now this. He was using Jamal to control her, to remind her that he held all the power. Maya lay flat on her back, staring at the ceiling's water stains. This time, she didn't try to meditate. She didn't seek the calm that had sustained her through solitary. Instead, she began making a list in her mind, cataloging every person who needed to fall before she could walk out of Coldstone. Kyle's face came first, his smirk as she was dragged from the courtroom. Then Warden Mercer, protecting his nephew's corruption. The guards who looked the other way. The Bone Crew members who carried out their dirty work. The judges who rubber-stamped false charges. She added each name methodically, like loading bullets into a magazine. Each face became a target, each role in the system a weak point to exploit. Maya had always been good at strategy. It's what made her unbeatable in the cage fights. Now she would use that same tactical mind to dismantle the entire machine, piece by piece. The faces filled her vision as she stared upward, replacing the stained ceiling with a mental map of destruction. She didn't blink. She didn't rest. She didn't pray for peace or justice or mercy. She made her list and she made it count. The morning sun beat down on the prison yard, casting harsh shadows across the cracked concrete. Maya stood near the fence, her back against the chain link as she surveyed the yard with careful eyes. The Bone Crew huddled at their usual table, quieter than normal, but their smirks and sideways glances told Maya everything she needed to know. They were plotting something. She noticed the change in patterns immediately. White inmates who normally avoided her were suddenly drifting closer, their movements too casual to be genuine. Maya kept her face neutral, her posture relaxed, but her muscles tensed beneath her orange jumpsuit. A woman with strawberry blonde hair pulled into a messy braid approached, flanked by two others. Maya recognized her from the laundry room, Bridget Cooper, 3 years into a 7-year sentence for drug possession. She'd never associated with the Bone Crew before. Hey, Bridget said, her voice pitched low and friendly. Got a minute? Maya didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. She watched Bridget's hands, her stance, looking for signs of concealed weapons or aggressive intent. Look, I know you don't trust anyone in here, Bridget continued, glancing nervously at the Bone Crew's table. But some of us, We're sick of their shit too. They've been running this place like their personal kingdom for too long. Maya kept her expression blank, but her mind was racing. The setup was obvious. Too obvious. Bridget was trying too hard, her concerned act just slightly overdone. I heard about your brother. Bridget lowered her voice further. That's messed up, bringing a kid into this. We want to help. Maya's jaw tightened at the mention of Jamal, but she maintained her silence. Let them show their hand. We've got connections in the juvenile wing, one of Bridget's companions added. We could keep an eye on him, make sure he's safe. Maya finally spoke, her voice carefully controlled. That's very generous of you. Bridget's relief at getting a response seemed genuine, but something in her eyes flickered. Guilt, maybe, or fear. She reached into her pocket slowly, telegraphing the movement to avoid appearing threatening. Here, she pulled out a folded piece of paper. If you want to talk more about helping your brother, follow these instructions. But come alone. The Bone Crew has eyes everywhere. Maya took the note, unfolded it with steady hands. The message was simple. Get to chapel. Alone. 3 p.m. She nodded once, tucking the paper into her pocket. Bridget smiled, too bright, too eager. You're doing the right thing, she said before walking away with her companions. Maya watched them go, noting how they immediately separated, heading in different directions. Too coordinated to be casual. She glanced at the Bone Crew's table again. They were still watching, their smirks wider now. When lunch call came, Maya stayed in the yard until the last possible moment. Instead of heading to the mess hall, she slipped away toward the chapel. If this was a trap, and she knew it was, better to be early and control the situation. The chapel was a small, plain building with wooden pews and simple crosses on the walls. Maya entered quietly, noting the empty podium, the shadows in the corners, the potential weapons within reach. She counted 4 wooden crosses mounted on the walls, 3 hymnals on the back pew, and a metal communion tray near the altar. The door clicked shut behind her. Maya didn't turn around as she heard the key turn in the lock, followed by footsteps walking away. She remained still, listening intently. A shuffle of movement behind the nearest pillar. Breathing. 2 people, trying to be quiet, but unable to completely mask their excitement. Maya kept her hands loose at her sides, her weight balanced on the balls of her feet. 2 members of the Bone Crew emerged from behind the pillar, grinning. Maya recognized them from the laundry room fight. Sarah Switchblade Martinez and Jenny the Hammer Thompson. They'd gotten new tattoos since she'd last seen them. Fresh ink on their necks marking them as having moved up in the crew's hierarchy. Ain't so tough without an audience, are you? Sarah sneered, pulling a sharpened toothbrush from her sleeve. Jenny circled to Maya's left, cracking her knuckles. Bridget played her part real nice, didn't she? Amazing what people will do to shave time off their sentence. Maya remained silent, tracking their movements with small shifts of her eyes. They were cocky, undisciplined, expecting an easy target after her time in solitary. She let them think it, kept her breathing steady as they moved closer. Sarah lunged first, slashing with the makeshift weapon. Maya stepped inside her reach, her hand striking up under Sarah's jaw with surgical precision. Her fingers found the pressure point at the base of the throat, applying exact pressure. Sarah's eyes went wide as her airway constricted. The sharpened toothbrush clattered to the floor. Jenny charged from the left, but Maya was already moving. She grabbed one of the wooden crosses off the wall, using its length like a staff to catch Jenny in the solar plexus. As Jenny doubled over, Maya brought the cross down on the back of her head. Not enough force to kill, but plenty to render her unconscious. Sarah was on her knees now, gasping for air. Maya released the pressure point, allowing her to collapse forward. Both Bone Crew members lay still on the chapel floor. Maya heard the key in the lock again. She placed the cross gently back on the wall, then knelt beside the unconscious women, folding her hands in her lap. The door opened and Officer Peterson stepped in, his hand already on his baton. He froze at the scene before him, 2 inmates down, Maya kneeling calmly between them as if in prayer. "What the hell happened?" he demanded, reaching for his radio. Maya looked up, her face serene in the dusty chapel light. They needed Jesus. The fluorescent lights in Maya's cell buzzed softly as she hunched over a small scrap of paper, her movements deliberate and controlled. The scratching of her stubby pencil echoed against the concrete walls as she worked out the details of her plan. She'd been defensive long enough, taking hits and dodging attacks. Now it was time to strike back. June's words from earlier that day rang in her head. "You've got to think bigger than personal revenge. The whole system's rigged, not just against you." Maya had nodded, understanding flowing between them without words. The daughters had shown her their hidden archive, years of documented abuse, guard rotations, contraband routes. All the pieces were there. She just had to arrange them properly. Maya paused her writing when footsteps approached. She slipped the paper into a small tier in her mattress, waiting until the guard passed before retrieving it. The code she used was simple but effective. Laundry instructions mixed with food requests, meaningless to anyone who didn't know the key. The daughters had perfected it over years of passing messages. Her hand moved across the paper again, mapping out the connections. The Bone Crew had protection from the guards, but they weren't the only white power group in Coldstone. The Iron Sons controlled most of the contraband trade, and they didn't share power easily. Maya had watched their interactions in the yard, the tense nods, the careful distance kept between the two groups. A fragile peace built on mutual benefit, peace that could easily shatter. Marla appeared at Maya's cell during morning count, her face carefully blank as she collected laundry. Their fingers brushed as Maya handed over her sheets, passing the coded note. Marla's eyes flickered with understanding before she moved on, pushing her cart down the row of cells. In the common area later that morning, Marla sat across from Maya, dealing cards for a game of solitaire. Her movements were casual as she spoke in low tones. "Got what you need?" Marla murmured, arranging the cards. "Guard rotation schedules, contraband routes, even some real names of Iron Sons outside contacts. The daughters have been collecting intel for years, waiting for the right moment." Maya picked up a card, pretending to study it. "Can you forge the handwriting?" Marla smiled slightly. "Honey, I was a court clerk for 15 years. I can forge anything. Already started on the notes, making them look like internal Bone Crew communications. Very convincing stuff about how they've been feeding information to the guards about Iron Sun's operations. How soon? Give me till tonight. I'll have everything ready. Supply manifests, guard correspondence, the whole package. Question is, how do we plant it?" Maya placed a card deliberately on the table. "Leave that to me. I know exactly where it needs to go." Later in the laundry room, Maya worked methodically, folding sheets while watching the supply door. She'd noticed the pattern. Every Tuesday, the Iron Sons had kitchen duty. Every Tuesday, they checked the supply crates for hidden packages. Their contraband operation depended on precise timing and trusted routes. June approached, pushing a cart of clean towels. "You sure about this?" she asked quietly. "Once it starts, there's no controlling how far it goes." Maya continued folding, her movements never faltering. "That's the point. Let them tear each other apart. While they're focused on their little war, we can move on the real target." June nodded slowly. Warden Mercer. And his nephew. Maya's voice hardened slightly at the thought of Kyle. They think they're untouchable because they've got everyone fighting each other. Time to change the game. That evening, Maya waited until shift changed to make her move. The guards were always distracted during handover, more focused on getting home than watching the inmates. She slipped into the supply room with a cleaning cart, her movements purposeful, just another trustee doing her job. The forged documents were hidden in her jumpsuit, carefully folded to prevent creasing. Marla's work was perfect. The handwriting matched known Bone Crew members, the paper was appropriately aged, and the information was just detailed enough to be believable while being vague enough to avoid immediate verification. Maya located the correct supply crate, the one she'd watched Iron Sons check repeatedly over the past weeks. She tucked the documents into a small gap between the wood slats, making sure just a corner was visible. Anyone searching for contraband would find it easily. She was back in her cell before the new shift fully settled in, lying on her bunk with a book when the guard walked past. Everything was in motion now. All she had to do was wait. The next day dawned hot and humid, the kind of weather that made tempers flare. Maya sat with June on their usual bench in the yard, watching the morning routine unfold. The Iron Sons were at their regular table, but something was different. Their leaders kept huddling together, throwing dark looks toward the Bone Crew's area. The documents had been found. "How long?" June asked quietly, not looking up from her crossword puzzle. Maya picked up a peach from her breakfast tray, turning it slowly in her hands. "Not long. Look at Martinez. He's already got his hand in his sock." June glanced up briefly. "Shiv? Probably. They wouldn't risk bringing anything bigger into the yard, not with the new scanner protocols." The tension in the yard was palpable now. Other inmates were picking up on it, slowly moving away from the two white power groups. The guards seemed oblivious, more concerned with their coffee and conversation than the brewing storm. Maya bit into her peach, the sweet juice a sharp contrast to the metallic taste of anticipation in the air. She chewed slowly, deliberately, as the first shouts erupted from the Iron Sons table. It happened fast, Martinez crossing the yard in long strides, his face twisted with rage. The Bone Crew lieutenant never saw the Shiv coming. Blood sprayed across the concrete as the makeshift blade found his neck. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then chaos erupted. Bodies collided as the two groups crashed together. Weapons appeared from nowhere. Sharpened toothbrushes, soap bars filled with batteries, strips of metal torn from bed frames. The guards' whistles pierced the air, almost drowned out by the sound of alarms blaring through the yard. Maya didn't move from her bench. She took another bite of her peach, watching as guards in riot gear flooded the yard. Batons swung, pepper spray clouded the air, and bodies hit the ground. The Bone Crew and Iron Sons were too far gone in their rage to care about consequences now. June remained equally still beside her, calmly filling in another crossword answer as the violence raged around them. Neither woman flinched as an inmate crashed to the ground near their feet, blood streaming from his nose. Maya finished her peach, watching the carefully orchestrated chaos unfold. She'd given them the spark. Now they would burn themselves down. The lockdown lasted 3 days after the yard fight. When it finally lifted, Coldstone hummed with a different kind of tension. The Bone Crew's power had been shattered. 2 of their leaders were in the infirmary, 3 more in solitary. The Iron Sons had taken heavy losses too, but they'd achieved their goal, destroying their rivals' credibility. Maya volunteered for night cleaning duty as soon as it was offered. Extra time out of her cell meant more opportunities to move information, and the night shift guards were usually more interested in their phones than the inmates. She pushed her mop down the empty corridors methodically, the wet strands leaving parallel lines on the worn linoleum. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows in the corners. Maya's arms ached from the repeated motion. Fresh bruises layered over old ones from her last random cell inspection. The guards had been particularly thorough, knowing she'd orchestrated the yard fight but unable to prove it. Ray, the elderly janitor, worked nearby, wiping down windows with slow, circular movements. He'd been at Coldstone longer than most of the guards, moving through the halls like a ghost, seeing everything but saying nothing. Maya had noticed how inmates and staff alike seemed to look right through him, as if his presence registered no more than the walls themselves. She dipped her mop into the bucket, wringing out excess water. Ray's reflection watched her in the window he was cleaning. His movements slowed, then stopped. "Those arms look painful," he said quietly, still facing the window. His voice was rough from disuse, barely above a whisper. Maya kept mopping, her strokes never faltering. She'd learned long ago that silence was often the safest response. Ray turned slightly, his weathered face half illuminated by the harsh lighting. "Must be hard, not knowing who to trust in here." He reached into his cleaning cart, movements deliberate and slow. "Especially when the ones meant to protect you are the ones hurting you." Maya's grip tightened on the mop handle, but she maintained her steady rhythm. Ray had never spoken more than a word or two to her before. Something was different tonight. He approached her carefully, like someone approaching a wounded animal. His hand emerged from the cart holding something small, a flash drive, its black surface dull in the fluorescent light. "You'll know what to do with it," Ray whispered, his eyes meeting hers directly for the first time. "Just don't wait too long." He pressed the drive into her palm, his calloused fingers trembling slightly. Maya slipped the drive into her sock without breaking stride. Ray returned to his windows as if nothing had happened, the only sound the quiet squeak of his cloth against glass. Back in her cell, Maya waited until the midnight count was complete before retrieving the drive. She'd hollowed out a Bible months ago, a trick June had taught her. The daughters kept their most important documents hidden in religious texts, knowing the guards rarely bothered to check them thoroughly. She worked quickly, sliding the drive into the cavity she'd carved into Psalms. The Bible went back on her small shelf, indistinguishable from the other books allowed in her cell. 3 hours later, a soft tap came at her wall. 3 quick knocks in succession. The signal from Teresa, one of the daughters who worked in medical. Maya responded with 2 knocks. "Ready." Teresa's tablet appeared through the meal slot, wrapped in a clean pillowcase. The daughters had a system for sharing the device, never more than 15 minutes per person, only during the deepest part of night when the guards were most likely to be drowsy or distracted. Maya's hands shook slightly as she unwrapped the tablet. This was the moment of truth. Whatever Ray had given her, she had exactly 12 minutes to view it before the device needed to move on. The flash drive's contents loaded quickly. Video files, dozens of them organized by date. Maya selected one from 2 weeks ago, the day of the laundry room attack. The footage was grainy but clear enough. She watched herself enter the chapel, saw the guard lock her in. The camera angle shifted to show 2 bone crew members emerging from behind the pillar. Maya's chest tightened as she watched herself defend against their attack, but it was what happened next that made her breath catch. The guard who'd locked her in stood outside the chapel door, laughing with another officer as the sounds of fighting echoed through the wood. They'd known. They'd planned it. She opened another file. This one showed Kyle Mercer entering through a side door after hours. No visitor badge, no sign-in process. He walked through the corridors like he owned them, eventually entering the warden's office. The timestamp showed this happening multiple times over several months. More videos played. Guards accepting envelopes from white supremacist inmates, the warden meeting with known gang leaders, medical staff ignoring serious injuries. Ray had been recording everything, building an archive of corruption that could bring the whole system down. Maya's vision blurred. She reached up to wipe her eyes, surprised to find tears rolling down her cheeks. They weren't tears of fear or despair. These were different. For the first time since her arrest, she felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Real, tangible hope backed by hard evidence that couldn't be ignored or explained away. This was what she needed. Proof that the system wasn't just broken, it was deliberately corrupted with Kyle Mercer's fingerprints all over it. A single knock echoed through her wall, June's signal. Maya quickly wiped her face, wrapped the tablet back in its pillowcase, and knocked twice in reply. "Ready?" A week after the video evidence emerged, Coldstone Penitentiary received an unexpected visitor. Layla Durant walked through the front gates with measured steps, her tailored navy suit and leather briefcase marking her as distinctly out of place among the prison's stark institutional walls. Her Harvard law degree and years of investigating corrupt institutions had taught her to read environments quickly, and everything about Coldstone screamed systemic failure. The guards at the entrance subjected her to extra scrutiny despite her state investigator credentials, their hostility barely concealed behind professional courtesy. Layla remained composed, her dark eyes taking in every detail. The way the senior guard's hand trembled slightly as he examined her paperwork, the younger one's nervous glances toward the security cameras. "Special Investigator Durant," Warden Mercer's secretary announced, ushering her into his office. The warden stood behind his desk, his attempt at a welcoming smile not reaching his eyes. "This is highly irregular," he said, gesturing to a chair. "We weren't given any notice of an investigation." "That's rather the point," Layla replied, taking her seat but declining his offer of coffee. She placed her briefcase on her lap, maintaining eye contact. The evidence submitted to the State Oversight Committee warranted immediate action. The warden's smile tightened. Evidence? I wasn't aware of any complaints. You'll be briefed on the details once we've conducted our preliminary interviews. Layla's tone was professional but left no room for argument. I'll need access to your inmates. Private conversations, no recording devices, no guard presence. That's against protocol. Actually, it isn't. Layla withdrew a document from her briefcase. State Statute 47.3b gives me full authority to conduct confidential interviews when investigating allegations of systemic misconduct. I'm sure you're familiar with the law. The warden's face flushed slightly, but he nodded to his secretary. Set her up in the recreation library. Throughout the morning, Layla interviewed a steady stream of inmates. Most sat in tense silence, eyes darting to the door as if expecting retribution at any moment. A few offered vague complaints about food quality or visitation rights, safe grievances that wouldn't draw attention. By early afternoon, Layla had filled several pages of her notepad with observations about what wasn't being said. The fear in the prison was palpable, running deeper than typical institutional anxiety. When Maya Thompson entered the library, Layla noticed the difference immediately. Where other inmates had slumped or fidgeted, Maya moved with deliberate precision, her posture straight but not rigid. She took her seat across the table, hands folded in front of her, and met Layla's gaze directly. Layla waited until the door clicked shut, then reached into her briefcase. She withdrew a tablet and placed it between them, displaying a still frame from one of the surveillance videos. The footage was sent from inside, Layla said quietly. That you? Maya's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. A careful assessment. I don't need mercy, she replied, her voice low and steady. I need fire. Layla leaned back slightly, giving Maya space to continue. For the next 45 minutes, she listened as Maya methodically laid out a pattern of corruption that went far beyond typical prison politics. Maya detailed Kyle Mercer's abuse of power, starting with their relationship outside the prison walls and ending with his regular off-books visits to Coldstone. She described the white supremacist gang's operations, their connections to guards, and the way they targeted specific inmates with administrative support. When she spoke about her brother Jamal's arrest, her voice remained controlled, but her hands tightened almost imperceptibly. She provided dates, locations, and names of officers involved in what was clearly a coordinated setup. The warden's role emerged as Maya continued, not just turning a blind eye, but actively facilitating a network of corruption that extended beyond the prison walls. She described specific meetings, money transfers, and incidents of violence that had been covered up. Layla's pen moved steadily across her notepad, recording everything. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask clarifying questions. Maya's account was precise, detailed, and delivered with the kind of cold clarity that came from months of careful observation and planning. When Maya finally fell silent, Layla reviewed her notes. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Not just individual bad actors, but an entire system designed to protect itself while crushing anyone who threatened to expose it. She closed her notepad deliberately, meeting Maya's unwavering gaze. You just gave me a war. Maya stood, clasping her hands behind her back in a stance that somehow managed to convey both submission to prison protocol and absolute defiance of the system itself. No, she replied. I gave you ammunition. Layla gathered her materials, understanding the weight of what she'd just been handed. This wasn't just another case. It was a chance to dismantle something fundamentally broken. As the guard escorted her out, she glimpsed Maya being led back to her cell. The inmate's expression was unchanged, but there was purpose in her stride. Back in her cell, Maya sat on her thin mattress and withdrew a carefully folded paper from inside her pillowcase. She smoothed it out, revealing a list of names written in tight, controlled script. Without hesitation, she drew a single line through the first entry, Warden Mercer. The morning after Layla's visit dawned with an unfamiliar tension at Coldstone. The usual morning routines felt brittle, like ice about to crack. Guards who typically lounged at their posts now stood rigid, hands hovering near their batons. The breakfast line moved in complete silence, inmates keeping their eyes fixed on the scratched metal floor. Maya noticed the changes immediately. The casual cruelty had been replaced by something more calculated. During morning cell check, Officer Reynolds tore through her meager belongings with particular vigor, scattering her few books and dumping her thin mattress onto the floor. She stood perfectly still, face neutral, as he invaded her space. "Clean this mess up," he snapped, stepping over her scattered possessions. Maya waited until he was gone before carefully retrieving her hidden list of names from its hiding place in the Bible's hollow spine. By lunchtime, whispers spread through the prison about random reassignments. Maya watched as Gloria, one of the senior daughters, was escorted to a different block. Then Teresa, who ran their kitchen network. One by one, the carefully constructed web of communication began to unravel. In the cafeteria, Maya's tray came with an extra piece of cornbread. She broke it open carefully, finding a small scrap of paper inside. The message was brief but clear. "Eyes on you. Stay down." She let the paper dissolve on her tongue, swallowing the warning with her tasteless meal. The yard that afternoon felt like a powder keg. Maya kept to her usual routine, walking the perimeter with measured steps. Officer Briggs, notorious for his racial slurs and quick temper, watched her from the guard tower. She could feel his hatred like a physical weight. "Thompson," he barked suddenly, "against the wall, random search." Maya complied without hesitation, assuming the position. Briggs was rougher than necessary, shoving her hard enough that her cheeks scraped against the concrete. His hands were invasive, professional procedure forgotten in favor of humiliation. "Think you're smart, don't you?" he whispered, pressing her harder against the wall. "Think you can play games with us?" Maya remained silent, her breathing steady despite the pressure on her chest. She focused on a small crack in the concrete, counting the tiny ridges until Briggs finally stepped back. "Nothing here," he announced loudly, disappointment evident in his voice. This time, June found Maya later in the laundry room, her weathered face tight with concern. "They're trying to make you crack," she said quietly, folding sheets with practiced efficiency. "Don't give them what they want." "I know the game," Maya replied, rubbing her bruised shoulder. "Been playing it my whole life." A guard appeared at the door. "Thompson, visitor." Maya was escorted to the same recreation library where she'd met Layla before. The investigator looked more tired than their previous meeting, dark circles visible under her eyes despite her professional demeanor. "The flash drive checked out," Layla said without preamble once they were alone. "Every frame authenticated. No signs of tampering." She spread several documents on the table between them. "The governor's office is involved now. Media outlets are starting to ask questions. Things are going to move fast." Maya studied Layla's face, reading the unspoken message. But you're exposed here," Layla replied. "We can move you to protective isolation. Different facility, new identity. Keep you safe until this breaks open." Maya's hands remained folded in her lap, steady and sure. "You mean hide me?" "I mean protect you. The people you've exposed, they're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes, but they're also at their most dangerous." "I didn't fight this hard to vanish now," Maya said quietly but firmly. "I won't give them the satisfaction." Layla leaned forward, her voice dropping. "This isn't about satisfaction. This is about survival. You can't finish what you started if you're dead." "I'm not running." Maya's tone left no room for argument. "Not from them. Not from anyone." That night, Maya lay awake in her cell, listening to the familiar symphony of prison sounds, distant doors, muffled voices, the occasional cry. Her new cellmate, transferred in that morning, had been suspiciously quiet all day. The attack came at 3 a.m. Maya's combat instincts, honed through years of cage fighting, saved her life. She sensed the movement a split second before the makeshift blade descended toward her throat. Rolling sideways, she took the hit in her shoulder instead. The new cellmate, Maya hadn't even learned her name, fought with desperate intensity. Not the usual prison violence, but the focused determination of someone who had been well paid and well threatened. Maya blocked another strike, feeling warm blood running down her arm. In the darkness, she could barely make out her attacker's features, but she caught the glint of tears on the woman's face. This wasn't personal. This was Kyle's message. The fight was brutal but brief. Maya managed to disarm her attacker, using the woman's own momentum to slam her into the cell wall. The blade clattered to the floor as guards finally responded to the commotion. Light flooded the cell. Maya stood with her hands raised, blood dripping onto the concrete floor. Her attacker lay unconscious but breathing. The message had been delivered, received, and answered. As the medical staff bandaged her shoulder, Maya caught June's eye across the infirmary. The older woman's face was grim, understanding passing between them without words. The stakes had been made clear. Every day Maya remained at Coldstone was another day she might not survive. But Maya had made her choice. She'd spent too long in shadows, too long watching systems grind good people to dust. The time for hiding was over. Back in her cell, cleaned and stitched, Maya pressed her hand against her wounded shoulder. The pain helped her focus, helped her remember every name on her list. Kyle thought he could force her into the shadows. He thought fear would make her disappear. He had forgotten what she was before he tried to break her, forgotten the girl who fought her way up from nothing, who learned to take hits and keep standing. Maya Thompson didn't break. She didn't run. And she sure as hell didn't disappear. 2 days after the attack, Maya sat on her bunk, her shoulder still throbbing beneath fresh bandages. The morning light filtered weakly through the narrow window, casting thin shadows across her cell floor. Her body ached, but she kept her posture straight, refusing to show weakness even in private. June appeared at her cell during morning rounds, her face tight with concern. In her hands, she clutched a crumpled piece of paper, the daily transfer list she'd managed to swipe from the administration office during her cleaning shift. "Got the new block assignments," June said quietly, her eyes scanning the corridor for guards. She began reading names in a low voice, each one representing another piece of the daughter's network being scattered across the prison. Maya listened with practiced stillness until a particular name made her whole body go rigid. "Jamal Thompson," June read, her voice dropping even lower. "Juvenile Wing, Block J." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Her carefully maintained composure cracked just for a moment as her hands gripped the thin mattress beneath her. Her little brother, here, in this place of violence and shadows. "When?" Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yesterday." June folded the paper carefully. "They processed him late, after lockdown." Maya's mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. Jamal was just a kid, smart and gentle, who still collected basketball cards and worried about math tests. Now he was here, surrounded by the same people who'd tried to kill her just days ago. She needed to reach him, needed him to know he wasn't alone. During lunch, Maya found Marla sorting laundry carts near the juvenile unit entrance. The older woman's clever eyes took in Maya's desperate expression immediately. "I need a favor," Maya said, keeping her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. Marla nodded, already understanding. She worked this section regularly, delivering clean linens to the juvenile wing. It was one of the few points of contact between the main prison and the youth unit. "Write it quick," Marla said, slipping Maya a small scrap of paper and a stubby pencil. Maya's hands shook slightly as she wrote, "Stay quiet. Trust no one. I'm here." Simple words, but she hoped they would be enough to keep him safe, to let him know he wasn't abandoned. Marla tucked the note into a folded pillowcase and added it to her cart. "I'll make sure he gets it," she promised. Maya returned to her work detail, every minute stretching like hours as she waited for word back. The uncertainty was worse than any physical pain she'd endured. She couldn't protect him if she couldn't reach him. That evening, Marla passed Maya in the dinner line, discreetly pressing a folded paper into her palm. Maya waited until she was alone in her cell before opening it. Jamal's familiar handwriting made her throat tight. "They said you're dangerous. Are you okay?" The simple question, so innocent, so concerned about her when he was the one in danger, broke something inside Maya. For the first time since her arrest, since the beginning of this war, she felt tears sliding down her face. She sat on her bunk, pressing her fist against her mouth to stay silent as the tears fell. The weight of everything, the violence, the corruption, the constant danger, suddenly felt overwhelming. Her certainty wavered. Was she making things worse? Had her fight for justice only put Jamal in more danger? The next morning, Layla arrived for another meeting. The investigator's professional demeanor couldn't quite hide her excitement as she spread new documents across the library table. "It's growing," Layla said. "Other inmates are coming forward now. 3 former guards have agreed to testify about corruption under immunity deals." She tapped a particular file. "We've traced money from Kyle's account to known gang members outside the prison. The web is unraveling." Maya studied the papers, trying to focus through her exhaustion. "How long?" "A few more weeks, maybe less. We're building a tunnel under these walls, Maya. All you have to do is keep walking." Layla leaned forward. "We're going to bring this whole system down." But Maya could only think of Jamal alone in the juvenile wing. A few weeks felt like an eternity. After the meeting, Maya made her way to the chapel during free period. The prayer logbook sat open on a small table near the altar, a seemingly innocent record of spiritual reflection that the daughters had turned into a communication network. Maya wrote carefully, coding her message into a prayer about protection and guidance. To most eyes, it would look like standard religious text, but for those who knew the code, it was a message to the juvenile unit. "Brother in danger. Watch over him. Report any threats." That night, lying in her dark cell, Maya pressed her ear to the cold wall near the water pipes. The ancient plumbing system ran throughout the prison, including the juvenile wing. The daughters had long ago worked out a pattern of knocks to communicate across blocks. Just after midnight, she heard it. 3 quick taps followed by 2 slow ones. Jamal's signal, taught to him through the note network. He was safe. He was listening. He understood. Maya closed her eyes, letting out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for days. Her brother was alive and aware. For now, that would have to be enough. She knocked back. 2 quick, 1 slow, 2 quick. Their childhood pattern for "I love you." The pipes carried his response. The same pattern, repeated back. In the darkness of her cell, Maya pressed her hand against the wall, imagining she could feel her brother's presence through the layers of concrete and steel. He was safe, for now. But Maya knew that for now wasn't enough. Not in Coldstone. Not with Kyle's influence reaching through every crack and shadow. The next morning brought an unusual quiet to Coldstone. Maya noticed it during breakfast. The guards were distracted, huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. Their radios crackled more frequently than usual, and several posts stood empty. Through the daughters' network, whispers spread quickly. All prison staff had been summoned for an emergency meeting at 9 a.m. Even the kitchen workers and maintenance crew were called in, something that hadn't happened in years. June shuffled past Maya's table, deliberately dropping her napkin, written in tiny letters along the edge. "State cars in parking lot. Suits." Maya kept her expression neutral as she watched the morning unfold. Guards rushed through their duties, barely paying attention to the inmates. The usual morning head count was performed hastily, with none of the usual power plays or harassment. In the laundry room, Marla worked close to Maya, speaking under the noise of the machines. Word is, state investigators showed up before dawn, went straight to the warden's office with boxes. The tension in the air grew thicker as the morning progressed. Even the most hardened inmates seemed to sense something significant was happening. The Bone Crew members looked uncertain, their usual swagger diminished as they watched their guard allies disappear one by one into the administration building. Through the small windows of Block D, Maya could see official vehicles arriving, black SUVs with government plates. Men and women in suits carried briefcases and boxes, moving with purpose between buildings. "They're pulling files," June whispered during work detail. "Everything from the last 5 years. Heard it from Ray in maintenance. Said they're focused on transfer records and incident reports." Maya continued folding sheets, her movements deliberate and calm. She'd been waiting for this moment, had helped build it piece by piece. But she knew better than to celebrate too early. The system didn't give up its power easily. Around noon, the energy in the prison shifted. The emergency meeting had ended, but only half the regular guards returned to their posts. The others remained in the administration building, presumably being questioned. Then came the moment Maya had been waiting for. Warden Thomas Mercer's heavy footsteps echoed through Block D. He moved with barely contained fury, his face flushed red beneath his silver hair. 2 guards flanked him, looking uncomfortable as he made his way directly to Maya's cell. The other inmates fell silent, watching. Even the constant background noise of the prison seemed to dim. Mercer stood before Maya's cell, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His carefully maintained image of authority was cracking, showing the rage beneath. Maya sat on her bunk, facing him with perfect stillness. "You think this ends with me?" He spat, his voice trembling with anger. His knuckles were white where they gripped the cell bars. Maya met his gaze steadily. She'd faced down worse threats in darker places. This man, for all his power and connection, was just another bully trying to hold onto control that was slipping away. "No," she replied, her voice clear and calm in the silence. "You're just where it starts." Mercer's face contorted. For a moment, it seemed he might order the guards to open the cell, to give him one last chance at violence. But one of the guards touched his arm gently, whispering something about observers present. The warden straightened his jacket, trying to recover his dignity, but everyone watching could see it. The power was already gone. He was just a man in an expensive suit, facing consequences he'd thought he was immune to. Without another word, he turned and stormed away. His footsteps faded, leaving behind a charged silence. The rest of the day passed in a blur of whispered updates and furtive glances. The daughter's network hummed with activity, passing news from block to block. Around 3 in the afternoon, they watched through whatever windows they could find as Warden Mercer was escorted to his car. There was no media circus, no dramatic arrest. Just a quiet removal, Mercer walking stiffly between 2 state officials, carrying a small box of personal items. His car pulled away from Coldstone without ceremony, leaving behind an institution in turmoil. That night, after lights out, the celebration began. It started with soft tapping on the walls, the daughter's code spreading joy and triumph through the pipes and concrete. Whispered prayers of thanks rose from dozens of cells. Women who had suffered under Mercer's regime finally allowed themselves to feel hope. Maya lay in her bunk, listening to the subtle sounds of victory around her. She thought of Jamal, hoping the news had reached him in the juvenile wing. 1 threat down, but more remained. The next morning revealed the changing power dynamics clearly. The Bone Crew, Mercer's favored enforcers, sat subdued at breakfast. Without their protector, their foundation was crumbling. By midday, 3 Bone Crew leaders had been escorted to segregation, officially for previous infractions that had suddenly been discovered. Others found themselves subject to the same strict rules they'd previously been exempt from. Maya walked through the yard during afternoon recreation, her steps measured and confident. Inmates who had once avoided eye contact now nodded respectfully as she passed. The Bone Crew members who remained free gave her a wide berth, their earlier bravado replaced with uncertainty. It was a silent show of power, not through violence or threats, but through patience and strategy. Maya had helped topple a corrupt system from within, and everyone knew it. She moved through the yard untouched, her victory evident in every step. The other inmates watched her pass, understanding that something fundamental had shifted in Coldstone. The old power structure was crumbling, and in its place, something new was emerging, something built on justice rather than fear. The morning sun filtered through the narrow windows of Coldstone's visitor room as Layla Durant settled into the metal chair across from Maya. The investigator's usual professional composure was tinged with something new, a hint of triumph in her eyes. "The appeal has been filed," Layla said, keeping her voice low despite the relative privacy of the room. She opened her briefcase, spreading several documents on the table between them. Prosecutorial misconduct, racial targeting, fabricated evidence, all backed with solid documentation. Maya studied the papers, her expression carefully neutral. She'd learned long ago that hope was dangerous in places like this. But seeing the official stamps, The careful legal language that would help dismantle her wrongful conviction made her heart beat faster. But, Layla continued, tapping her fingers on the stack of papers, the process will take weeks, maybe longer. The system moves slowly, especially when it's being forced to admit its own failures. She leaned forward, lowering her voice further. You sure you want to stay here until it's official? We could arrange protective custody in another facility. Maya's response was immediate. If I leave before the roots are ripped up, they'll grow back. Her eyes met Layla's with unwavering determination. We need to finish what we started. Later that afternoon, Maya found June in their usual spot, the quiet corner of the library where the security cameras had convenient blind spots. The older woman was already waiting, surrounded by seemingly random books pulled from the shelves. Time to empty the vault, June said, her one good eye gleaming with purpose. Every scrap, every record, every dirty secret the daughters have collected over the years. Maya nodded, understanding the magnitude of what they were about to do. The daughters' archive was more than just evidence. It was decades of witnessed injustice, carefully documented and preserved by women who refused to be silenced. Over the next 3 nights, they worked in shifts, coordinating through their network of trusted inmates. Each piece of evidence had to be carefully copied and smuggled out through different routes to avoid detection. In the laundry room, Marla carefully stitched documents into pillowcases, medical records showing systematic neglect, dates and names of inmates denied critical care. Another daughter, working in the kitchen, hollowed out the spines of books from the chapel library, filling them with photographs of abuse and witness statements. June supervised it all with the precision of a general commanding troops. Her decades in Coldstone had taught her every weakness in the system, every gap in security that could be exploited. She knew which guards could be distracted and when, which cameras occasionally malfunctioned, which maintenance schedules would provide the best cover. Maya focused on organizing the evidence, ensuring each package told a clear story. She grouped together the sterilization records, proof of procedures performed without consent, particularly on women of color. She compiled documentation of surveillance footage that had been conveniently lost during incidents of violence. False psychological evaluations used to extend sentences or deny parole came next, followed by financial records showing suspicious patterns in commissary accounts. The work was painstaking and dangerous. Every movement had to appear normal, every exchange casual. They used the daughters' established codes, a dropped pencil here, a specific pattern of coughs there, laundry folded in particular ways to signal safe passages. On the 3rd night, as they prepared the final bundle, June pulled Maya aside. "You understand what this means?" she whispered. "Once this gets out, there's no going back. The whole system will feel the earthquake." Maya helped tape together the last package, her movements deliberate and sure. "That's exactly what we need. A quake big enough to break the foundation." The next morning, Layla arrived for what appeared to be a routine follow-up interview. She carried an empty cardboard box, ordinary, unremarkable. Through the carefully choreographed movements of the daughters, every piece of evidence made its way into that box. A book passed during library hours, a pillowcase exchanged during a routine cell inspection. Documents slipped between official papers during interviews. When Layla finally walked out of Coldstone, the plain box under her arm contained enough evidence to shake the prison system to its core. That evening, Maya sat in the common room with other inmates watching the small television mounted high on the wall. The national news logo flashed across the screen, followed by aerial footage of Coldstone Penitentiary. The anchor's voice was grave as she introduced the first segment of what would become a major investigation. The room fell silent as the story unfolded. Women who had lived through years of abuse and neglect watched as their experiences were finally acknowledged on national television. Some stared in stunned silence. Others wept quietly, holding each other's hands. Maya felt June's presence beside her, solid and unwavering. On screen, experts were already beginning to weigh in on the evidence, their faces serious as they discussed patterns of corruption and systematic abuse. "Next," Maya said, turning to June with quiet determination, "we burn it down legally." June nodded, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and fierce pride. They both knew this was just the beginning, that the real fight would happen in courtrooms and government offices, through lawyers and legislators and reform advocates. But for the first time in decades, the walls of Coldstone didn't feel quite so impenetrable. Around them, other inmates continued to watch the broadcast, their expressions shifting from disbelief to something stronger, the dawning realization that their voices were finally being heard. The storm they had carefully built inside Coldstone's walls was now raging in the outside world, and nothing would be the same. The morning sun cast long shadows across Coldstone's concrete yard as Maya walked to breakfast. The atmosphere had shifted dramatically in the week since the national news broke the story. Gone were the tense shoulders and watchful eyes that had defined daily life for so long. Instead, a different kind of quiet filled the prison's halls. Not the silence of fear, but of change. Guards who once swaggered through the corridors now kept their distance, averting their eyes when Maya passed. Their authority had been shaken, replaced by an uncertainty that showed in their hesitant movements and clipped commands. They no longer lingered in the halls or made excuses to search cells. Their power games had evaporated in the harsh light of public scrutiny. In the yard, Maya noticed how other inmates acknowledged her, not with the desperate deference of before, but with subtle nods of respect. Some even smiled, quick flashes of recognition that spoke volumes in a place where emotions were usually guarded. The Daughters Network still operated, but now their messages carried hope instead of warnings. The Bone Crew had practically disappeared. Without the warden's protection, their remaining members kept to themselves, their former bravado replaced by sullen silence. The yard belonged to everyone now, not just those who could fight for it. Maya was finishing her breakfast when a guard approached, his manner unusually professional. "Thompson, visitor in processing." She followed him through the familiar corridors, past the intake area where she'd first entered Coldstone 2 years ago. In the visitor's room, Layla Durant waited, her briefcase open on the table. The investigator's usual composed expression carried an extra warmth today, and she held a thick manila envelope in her hands. "Good morning, Maya," Layla said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I have some papers for you to review." Before Maya could respond, another guard appeared. "Follow me. The administrator wants to see you both." They were led to the warden's office, Mercer's old domain. The room felt different now, stripped of the heavy, oppressive furniture and personal touches that had made it feel like a trap. Behind the desk sat a thin man in wire-rimmed glasses, his temporary nameplate reading, Administrator Wilson. Wilson cleared his throat, shuffling through papers with methodical precision. "Ms. Thompson, I've received official documentation from the state court." He adjusted his glasses, reading from the top sheet. "Your conviction has been vacated, effective immediately. The state is dropping all charges due to clear evidence of prosecutorial misconduct, racial bias in the initial arrest and prosecution, and the systematic suppression of exculpatory evidence." Maya sat very still, her face carefully neutral despite the surge of emotion in her chest. She'd known this was coming, had fought for it, planned for it, but hearing the words spoken aloud made them suddenly startlingly real. "Furthermore," Wilson continued, "the state acknowledges significant civil rights violations in your case. Ms. Durant can discuss the details of potential civil proceedings, but that's separate from today's business." He looked up from his papers. "You're free to go, immediately." Maya turned to Layla, who nodded in confirmation. "It's real, Maya. We can leave as soon as you're ready." The processing took less than an hour. Maya changed out of her prison uniform into civilian clothes Layla had brought. Simple jeans and a t-shirt that felt strange against her skin after so long in institutional garments. Her few possessions fit into a small paper bag, some letters, the hollow Bible that had once held the flash drive, a few photos. June was waiting in the corridor as Maya emerged from processing. The older woman stood straight-backed against the wall, her one good eye taking in Maya's transformation. They walked together toward the main gate, their footsteps echoing in the morning quiet. Neither woman spoke until they reached the final checkpoint. There was no need for lengthy goodbyes or emotional declarations. They had already said everything that mattered through their actions, their shared battle for justice. June finally broke the silence, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. You were always more than a fighter. Maya turned to the woman who had helped her transform anger into action, survival into revolution. And you were more than a prisoner, she replied softly. The massive gates groaned open, revealing the world beyond Coldstone's walls. Maya stepped forward, feeling the warm sunlight on her face without barriers for the first time in 2 years. The sensation was almost overwhelming. The unfiltered brightness, the smell of cut grass, the sound of birds without concrete echoes. And there, waiting by Layla's car, stood Jamal. Her brother had grown taller during her absence, his face losing some of its childhood softness. But his eyes, those were the same, now filled with relief and barely contained emotion as he saw his sister walk free. They didn't need words. Maya crossed the distance between them in steady steps, and then they were holding each other. A fierce embrace that said everything about loss and love and survival. She could feel him trembling slightly, or maybe she was the one shaking. It didn't matter. They were together again. Behind them, Coldstone Penitentiary rose against the morning sky, its walls still imposing, its presence still heavy with the weight of countless lives contained within. But its shadow no longer reached Maya. She had transformed it from a tomb into a battlefield, and she had won. Layla waited patiently by the driver's side door, giving the siblings their moment. When they finally separated, she opened the car doors with a small smile. Ready? Maya slid into the back seat beside Jamal as Layla started the engine. As they pulled away from the prison, Maya reached into her small bag of belongings and removed a folded piece of paper, her list. She opened it carefully, running her finger down the names she had written in her cell so many nights ago. Each one was now crossed out. Warden Mercer, the Bone Crew leaders, corrupt guards, system officials who had looked the other way. Every name had a line through it, except one. The orange glow of flames lit up the night sky over Lake Lanier, reflecting off the dark water like a second sunset. The lake house, a sprawling 2-story structure that had belonged to Officer Kyle Mercer, was engulfed in fire. Smoke billowed into the cool Georgia evening as emergency vehicles lined the narrow access road, their lights painting the trees in alternating red and blue. Firefighters worked methodically, their hoses arcing water onto the inferno, but it was clear the structure couldn't be saved. The heat was intense enough to crack windows in neighboring homes, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning wood and melting plastic. Sheriff's deputies kept curious neighbors behind a hastily erected barrier of yellow tape. Among them stood Kyle's former partner, who kept shaking his head in disbelief. He was just here yesterday, he muttered to another officer. Seemed fine. Normal. As the fire gradually died down to smoldering ruins, investigators began their preliminary search. They picked through the debris carefully, looking for any sign of Kyle Mercer. Room by room, they found nothing but ash and charred furniture. No body, no remains. Just emptiness and the lingering heat of destruction. The investigation lasted 3 weeks. Experts examined burn patterns, tested debris samples, and interviewed neighbors. Their conclusion was documented in a brief report filed with the county. Probable gas leak. Accidental ignition. The case was closed without ceremony. Another tragedy filed away in metal cabinets. 2,000 miles away in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, life moved at a different rhythm. The afternoon sun beat down on a modest compound in one of the city's quieter neighborhoods. Behind its walls, women gathered in a courtyard, moving through combat stances with focused determination. The concrete walls around them were cracked but solid, marked with colorful murals of female warriors from Haitian history. This was Quai Femme Faux, House of Strong Women, though most locals knew it simply as the shelter. It had become a sanctuary for women seeking escape from violence, a place where they learned not just to fight, but to protect and support each other. At its heart was the mysterious founder known only as Tifi Béton, Concrete Daughter. Maya moved among her students with quiet grace, adjusting stances here, demonstrating techniques there. Her movements were precise, economical, born of years of experience both in and out of the ring. She spoke softly in Creole, her voice carrying just enough to be heard over the sounds of practice. The courtyard was alive with activity. Women of all ages learning to strike, to block, to escape holds. Some practiced with wooden training weapons, others worked on grappling techniques on worn mats. But it wasn't chaos. There was a rhythm to it, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere self-defense training. A young woman named Marie, barely 18 and still bearing fading bruises from her former life, watched Maya demonstrate a complex escape technique. Unlike many instructors Marie had seen, Maya didn't shout or make dramatic movements. Each action was controlled, almost gentle, yet undeniably effective. "Why do you fight so quiet?" Marie asked in Creole, curiosity overwhelming her usual shyness. Maya paused, considering the question with the same thoughtfulness she brought to everything. "Because it's not for noise," she replied softly. "It's for survival." The answer seemed to satisfy Marie, who nodded and returned to her practice with renewed focus. Maya watched her for a moment, seeing shadows of her own past in the young woman's determined movements. The day's training eventually wound down as the sun began to set. Women gathered their belongings, hugging each other goodbye until tomorrow. Maya checked the locks on the gates, secured the equipment, and made sure everyone had safe transportation home. A routine born of careful attention to detail and genuine concern for her students' safety. When everything was settled, Maya walked the familiar path to the beach. It was a quiet stretch of shoreline, away from the tourist areas and fishing boats. The waves rolled in with steady persistence, their rhythm unchanged by the dramas of human life. She stood at the water's edge, hands clasped behind her back in a pose that had become habitual during her time in prison. Her knuckles bore the marks of countless fights, some from her cage fighting days, others from Cold Stone, a few from protecting her students here in Haiti. But her eyes held a peace that had been hard-won, a calm that came from purpose rather than resignation. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, not unlike the fire that had consumed Kyle's lake house. Maya watched the colors reflect off the water, feeling the evening breeze against her skin. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Atlanta's underground fights to Cold Stone's cells, to this beach where she helped others find their strength. She whispered a name into the wind, Kyle's name, one final time, not in anger or hatred, but as a release, a period at the end of a long, dark sentence. Then Maya turned away from the sea and walked back toward the shelter, where tomorrow's work waited. Her footprints in the sand would soon be washed away by the tide, but the path she had carved for herself and others remained solid as concrete. If you enjoyed the story of Maya, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.